On December 27, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
This is the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Wednesday, August 30th. I'm Donal Ware. It's the Hump Day edition of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. We're now going to transition into week one of the HBCU football season, where most teams are going to be playing. On last week, there were a total of 4 HBCUs that played, but the majority, if not all, of the HBCUs will be playing this weekend. So it kicks off tomorrow, as a matter of fact. And one of the things that struck me about opening week, week one of this year's HBCU football season is that there are a lot of games that are quality games that could go either way. In years past, it's mainly been you have a lot of our schools that would play, at least in week one, a lot of these so-called money games. And that's not to say that some teams aren't, but there are a lot more matchups that are meaningful, and you'll see what I mean as I roll through this schedule. So our first game, West Virginia State, is going to be on the road at Morehead State. Fayetteville State and UNC Pembroke are going to get together. That's been a great battle in the Sandhills of North Carolina. That game is going to take place in Pembroke. Albany State and Wingate get together. The game is going to be at Wingate. And again, when you look at Wingate knocked off 2 HBCUs in the playoffs last year in Virginia Union and Benedict. And Albany State under Quinn Gray takes over, looking to get off on the right foot. Lincoln of Missouri, it's been a tough go for Lincoln of Missouri for several years, for many, many years now. I can't even remember. I remember the last time Lincoln of Missouri maybe even have had 3 or 4 wins in a season. And generally what happens with Lincoln of Missouri when you're talking about that MIAA conference, you play conference games almost immediately. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that is a conference game. Lincoln of Missouri is going to be on the road at Emporia State. Arkansas Pine Bluff playing up, going to travel to Tulsa, Oklahoma to take on Tulsa. A&T traveling to Birmingham to take on UAB. It's a new era of Aggie football. A&T is in the CAA now known as the Coastal Athletic Association, and Vincent Brown has taken over as the new head football coach. Virginia University of Lynchburg, or Virginia Lynchburg, going to be on the road at Carson Newman. Kentucky State hosts Clark Atlanta. That's not an it's 2 SIAC teams, not an SIAC game, but again, a competitive football game for both. And then another competitive football game, and I'm really interested to see how Lincoln of Pennsylvania gets the season started. Good quarterback situation there. Going to take, matter of fact, is going to be hosting Clarion. So those are all of the Thursday games. Friday, we have one Friday game. Howard going to be on the road playing up at Eastern Michigan. As a matter of fact, on tomorrow's HBCU Football Daily Podcast, we're scheduled to have all-world defensive back for Howard, Kenny Gallup, on tomorrow's program. Saturday, Delaware State is hosting Bowie State. It's the Lee Hull era at Delaware State. Elizabeth City State is hosting Catawba. Johnson C. Smith going to be on the road at West Virginia Wesleyan. Lane hosts Miles. Again, not an SIAC conference game, but a game between two SIAC opponents. Norfolk State, great Labor Day Classic in Norfolk, hosting Virginia State. And you know, Norfolk State has a stadium. Its on-campus stadium can seat 30,000. So hopefully, I mean, I don't know if they're going to get 30,000, but hopefully this is a game that Norfolk State alums will support, the community in Norfolk will support. And because even when you talk about Hampton, Hampton's going to be at a neutral site game. We'll talk more about that. So got some good HBCU football taking place there in the Tidewater area. Tennessee State on the road at Notre Dame. That's a big game. Notre Dame has never, my understanding, Notre Dame's never played an FCS opponent. And so, as a matter of fact, we're scheduled to have Eddie George, the head football coach at Tennessee State, on this weekend's edition of BOXTOROW. Also, Mississippi Valley State is hosting Central State. Mississippi Valley State looking to get off to the right start. I mentioned that game. Hampton's going to be playing in a game. The Brick City Classics taking place in Harrison, New Jersey, against Grambling. The defending HBCU champions, North Carolina Central, going to be start the season off at home against Winston-Salem State in a bit of a rivalry game from the CIAA days. Talk about a big-time football game and a Labor Day Classic taking place in Montgomery. And it's a big weekend, as a matter of fact, in Montgomery, Alabama. Alabama State is hosting Southern. That is a big game. Could be the HBCU National Game of the Week. We will see. Continuing on, Bethune-Cookman is on the road playing up against Memphis in a rivalry type of game. Alcorn State on the road at Southern Miss. This was a game that Fred McNair talked about extensively in terms of the proximity of the schools, both in Mississippi, and then a lot of times there are recruiting battles between Alcorn State and Southern Miss. So this, I know Alcorn State and its fans excited to be going to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Texas College going to be on the road at UT Permian Basin. Alabama A&M stepping up, going to be in Nashville, Tennessee, taking on Vanderbilt. Allen is hosting Erskine in a big game, the defending Division II HBCU national champs, as the coaches vote said at the end of last season. Benedict going to be hosting Shaw. That should be a good test for Shaw, and really for both, to see where both programs are early on in the season. We talked about this yesterday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. South Carolina State back on the road, taking on Charlotte on Saturday. Edward Waters is hosting Florida Memorial. This is the Big Cat Classic game. And you're talking about, of course, Edward Waters in Jacksonville and Florida Memorial coming off the loss on Saturday. Florida Memorial located in Miami. St. Augustine's is on the road at Lenoir-Rhyne. Livingstone is hosting Bluefield State. Now, welcome Bluefield State to the CIAA, and this is not a conference game, but should be a good test. I'm trying to think if these two teams played last year. I know Bluefield State played Johnson C. Smith, maybe not Livingstone, but don't sleep on Bluefield State. They had a solid season in 2022. Morgan State going to be on the road at Richmond in another Labor Day Classic and an important game. Texas Southern and Prairie View A&M are getting together already. I mean, implications for the SWAC's Western Division already in progress week one of the season. Savannah State going to be on the road at Southeastern on Saturday. Then you've got three games on Sunday. Florida A&M and Jackson State in Miami Gardens, Florida. Again, you talk about division matchup in the SWAC. This is a Eastern Division matchup, the Orange Blossom Classic. And now they're expecting some weather. They may be expecting some weather. And so we'll see how things play out. But right now, scheduled to play those two teams in Miami Gardens, Florida. Morehouse and Virginia Union going to get together in the Black College Football Hall of Fame Classic. That game going to take place in Canton, Ohio. And as I mentioned to you, big weekend in Montgomery, the Red Tails Classic. Again, not an SIAC, doesn't count as an SIAC game, but Fort Valley State and Tuskegee going to get together in Montgomery, Alabama. And that classic has continued to grow. So expecting a good crowd there in Montgomery. So that's a look at today's HBCU Football Daily Podcast, and a look as we transition now to week one of the HBCU football season. We always want to remind you to tell some friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can watch on the BOXTOROW YouTube channel, as well as listen on BOXTOROW and download, for that matter, on BOXTOROW.com, as well as iHeartMedia.com. We got a big show tomorrow. One of our guests will join us. We have a guest or two, really one guest, but we'll see who that guest is what I'm trying to say. So tune in to tomorrow's HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Talk with you then.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at BOXTOROW.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on BOXTOROW with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BOXTOROW for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.